Hello, hello, hello. This is Sarah Colata of Architecture Talk Tank, and I'm really excited because today is the 40th episode. So, on that occasion, we've got Juliette Mitchell joining me today, and Juliette is a copywriter in England who
Yep.
works.
I'll come to that in a minute because I don't call myself a copywriter. But yeah, we'll
No.
talk about that.
Well, you can tell a story a little bit about that. Anyway, me and Juliette, we connected over LinkedIn, and she's helping architects storytelling. I don't know, maybe let's just leave it to you, Juliette. Why don't you introduce
Okay.
yourself properly?
Yeah. So I pick up on that because more and more what I'm doing is less writing and more helping architects do their own writing. So I feel very strongly that learning, kind of having ways of writing about your own practice, your own projects, will give you better ways of thinking about your practice and your projects. So I'm all about enabling and facilitating and giving people the tools to do it themselves. So in a way, I do a lot of copywriting still, but it's not really my main focus. My main focus is about getting architects to do their own writing. So I'm actually from a publishing background. I spent many years working at Penguin as an editor, and that was obviously working with writers. I then set up on my own, and I was still working within the publishing industry, working with writers. And then more and more, or sort of gradually, I started doing some things with people who weren't writers, didn't want to be writers, but had to write things. And I had a kind of epiphany about how in almost all our jobs we have to write things, but we're not always comfortable doing that. But actually, if you can write well, you have there is such a power in that. It really is a superpower if you can write about what you do. And I started running workshops for people, who might have to write blog posts or brochures or anything like that. And there was also, for me, something quite liberating about it, because when you're working with writers, their whole creative happiness depends on their work. But when you're working with people who aren't writers and don't want to be writers, but just have to write things, there's a sort of liberation in, no, this isn't the end of the world if it doesn't go right. And that was, for me, quite liberating, and I really enjoyed that kind of work. And then I'm aware this is turning into quite a long story, but I realized that to sort of really start making a difference, I needed to kind of decide who I wanted to be working with, because, there are so many people out there who I could have been running workshops for, but no, I wanted to actually decide and feel like, I was going to be working with people who I really wanted to work with. And the answer came to me pretty quickly that would be architects. I've always admired architects. I think there's an amazing combination of the sort of technical ability, the creative side. There's also the people side of it, because you're doing it for clients. And for me, it kind of brings a lot of things together. And I've always been interested in architecture and in buildings. So that's how Archetypal came about. And that was in 2017 that I finally kind of, decided that's what I was doing. And I've been running Archetypal since then.
Interesting. So tell us a little bit more about the workshops. It's really fascinating. Teaching architects to write. What is the premise of that? So they can write their own websites or articles or books?
Basically anything. I mean, it all really comes down to telling stories, and I think these days that gets talked about a lot. But I think a lot of people don't actually think, stories are in everything we do. And it's through stories that you will engage your audience, because we are all hardwired to respond to stories. We're hardwired to respond to that sort of beginning, middle, end, and, being taken on a journey. And for architects, now let's take the example of writing about your project. If I ask an architect to tell me about a certain project, they'll probably come up with this detail and that detail, and this and that, and this was a problem, and they'll tell me all these different things, but they're not telling me a story, because they're describing it. And I think, when you're writing about a project for your website, say, you've probably been calling it a project description, but just by changing how you talk about it, starting to talk about a project story, suddenly it's more interesting. And if you get yourself into that mindset that this is a story you're telling, then you will take your readers with you. Now, if we just step back a moment, there's one thing that is very important before you even start to tell that story, and that is to have your audience very clearly in your mind. In fact, not your audience, but just one person. Just think of one person, imagine that person, and tell that person your story. Now, I would usually say, think of your ideal, perfect potential client, and think about what they're interested in, think about their hopes and their worries and all the things that are going through their mind. And once you've got that person in your head, write for them. Because I think one of the reasons that we all find, and when I say we, I mean even including myself, because I think writing is difficult for everybody. It's, it never becomes a painless process really, but you can take away a lot of the pain. So the thing to do is to really imagine that person and imagine you're talking to them. So something that I think often happens is that if you ask me to tell you about something, in fact, talking to you now, I can see you, you're smiling at me, you're nodding a bit, I'm responding to everything you say. Now, if I took you off the screen, and I just sat here in a room on my own with a blank wall in front of me, I would find it much harder to speak like this. I would dry up very quickly. And I think one of the problems with writing is that we dry up because we're looking at a blank page or a blank screen. So trick your brain into getting rid of that blank screen, trick your brain into talking to or writing for a person. I have a sort of little story about that, which is that my husband is a nature conservationist, and he was working on a project, and he had to write something about it, and he asked me if I could check it for him. And I started reading what he'd written, and it was terrible. It was, it was so dry, so dull, so passive. There was no life in it. And while I was looking at this, his phone rang, and he answered his phone, and he started talking to the person on the other end about. It was a work call, and he was talking about something that sounded really exciting. And then I realized that the project he was talking about was the same project as I was reading about, but he had written about it in a completely different way, because there's something about the way that our brain switches into a dull mode when we start writing, which is completely different to how we talk. So basically, writing should be more like talking. And, you might say to me, well, it's, I want to sound professional. But in the end, all your readers are humans. I know we have Google, who's kind of reading it as well for SEO and all of that. But forget about that. Your reader is a human, however professional they are, however much, they're wearing a suit and they're looking all professional. They are still a human, and they still want to read a good story.
It's so true. I really think about it every single time I write. I write my podcasts and all the content creation, and I always try to imagine someone I'm talking to. Even when I record my courses, I have literally those moments where I'm talking to the camera on my own in my room for hours.
Yeah.
And in that weird way, I can entertain myself, because I imagine always a person there,
Yeah. No, it's the brain is a very clever thing, but it's also something that we can trick. Yeah. And I think that is the first stage to making writing easier, is to imagine your audience. The next stage, of course, is to give yourself a structure. Do you want me to talk a bit about that? Yeah.
So more about structure.
Yeah. So stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There are all sorts of things we could say about stories. There's the hero's journey. There's all these different stages. But I like to keep it really simple. And I know my clients like me to keep it really simple. So beginning, middle, and an end. And the beginning is the inspiration behind it. It's really the why. So the why of the project, which probably will align with your own why as a practice, your purpose. Then the middle is the how, which is the challenge of the project and how you overcame it. And of course, that's a chance to speak about your all your skills. and the end is the what, as in the effect of the project, the success of the project, and how it changes things for your clients or for the people who are going to be living, working and playing in the building. So you have those three parts: inspiration, challenge, success or effect, and that gives you a really good story. And almost every project you can fit into that, but every story will be different, and you're not trying to tell every detail. I think that's another problem that comes up, that sometimes people think, oh, but I have to put this in and I have to add this detail, but you don't. A story is a curated entity. You don't have to say everything. You have to find your narrative thread and then follow that through, and that's what will make it kind of really interesting for your audience, and that's what will resonate with them. And of course, a question that is important to sort of sort out the answer to right at the beginning is, who is at the heart of this story, or who is the hero of this story? But I like to think of it as who is it at the heart of that story. And I'm sure, Sarah, that you know the answer to that. It's your client. It's not you. It's you are the facilitator. You're the helper. You make it happen. But the client is really at the heart of it. And it's I think I'm sure that you've had other guests on your podcast that have talked about this, but that architects are often writing for other architects, and they're not really. They find it quite difficult to be client focused and to really put the client at the heart of the way they talk about and write about their project. And I'm talking about writing here, but actually it's just as important for talking. And the point of what I do really is to help people communicate about their projects, whether it's writing and talking. And if often it's best to start. It's easier to start talking about your project to then write about it, just because that will put you in the right mindset of something that's alive and something that you're so if you actually have someone who you can start talking to about your project, that's even better than imagining. So if you've got a colleague or a very patient spouse or whoever who will let you explain, or not explain, that's the wrong word, but tell your story to, and then that will put you in the right mindset, especially if they're a good active listener, they're helping you on, and then write it. But yeah, writing and talking, it's all, as far as I can, in my mind, it's all the same thing, and we shouldn't be separating them out as we tend to do.
So interesting. I think that it's a very important point. I actually I was recording today a course on the topic of actually creating a compelling story in your email marketing for architects. Right. And when you get people opt into your website and they want to be on your newsletter, how do you tell a story about what you're up to, what you're doing, your expertise, and how you can help them? Because the point is that you want to open the doors for them to realize that there is these specific ways in which they can basically work with you, but also interest them more in who you are, and develop this kind of relationship, right? Some kind of attraction or affection to the person. And a lot of times I structure that. I tell, you should talk a little bit about a problem that you a lot of times see that the customer encounters, and and how that gets overcome, but also talk a little bit about emotions, maybe being blocked or overwhelmed or feeling stuck or being scared of moving forward, these kind of things. But I find that maybe it's such it's so outside of a comfort zone of an architect, who, like you said, is always thinking very professionally. So I think the question is, how far into creative writing you actually go? Where is the limit, when you...
I think it is about making it, bringing the emotions out, but it's still, you're sticking to the facts. You're not changing the story. And that's in a way what makes it easier, is that you have got that project to talk about, or your practice to talk about. It's just about bringing out the human story. And architects often think, well, it's the images that are doing all the work, the floor plans, the elevations. But think about your clients who are not necessarily fluent in floor plans and who don't quite know how to read the images. So you're telling them the story that will help them understand the images, and also you're telling them the story that the images can't tell, the story, the human story. So I don't, images and the words, they don't do the same thing. So, and don't try when you're writing to just describe the images. That's the worst thing, because actually the images can show the beautiful rendering or whatever so much better than the work than you can do in words. So let the images do the talking when it's to describe and show the design, and then in your words show how the design works for people, show the effect of the design. It's the human story. So in a way, you can say, oh, it's creative, it's creative writing, and there's a sort of an element of letting yourself be the storyteller in that nice creative way. But at the same time, it's real, and there is emotion in any project, however commercial, even if you work on big, create big office blocks, whatever, there is still emotion in there. There's still an emotional human story. And one thing to remember is that potential clients who are making a decision about working with you, yes, they'll have boxes to tick, as in they want to make sure that you've got the right credentials, that the budget, that you're going to, that you're not too expensive for them, whatever. But in the end, it's really an emotional decision, especially a big, doing an architectural project is such a big investment for people. Whether that's a homeowner or whether that's a commercial client, it's always a big investment. And I think the bigger the investment, the more it's actually a gut instinct that you then back up with your, making sure you've ticked the boxes and you've done your research. But actually, generally, who you want to work with, which architect you want to take, and then you make sure that it all adds up. Yeah. But I think the gut feeling comes first. And I think, on your website, you want to be as alive on the page or on the screen as you are in person. Get that personality across, get across what you will be like to work with. So don't just use the words that every other architect uses about, multidisciplinary, innovative, award-winning. Unpack those things. You can say that you're award-winning, but if you talk about winning awards, say we've won awards for this because we know we're really good at doing this, and you can look on this project and see how we've done it. Unpack it. It's that so what thing. Yes, you can say I'm innovative, but so what? So explain that this is what you do, so that this will work better, so that you'll feel better, so that the space will feel bigger, whatever. But drill down. So that's really about jargon and cutting out the, not using jargon, but bringing it back to what it really means. And again, what it really means for the client, not for you. You can use jargon when you're talking with your colleagues because you all know what you mean, and it's a very useful shortcut. You don't want to have to explain every time, so you just use jargon. But when you're talking to a client, that's when it's time to unpack it.
So interesting. And so you said something about, being natural on your social media and like really showing your persona. Do you have any clues as to how to unpack your own persona to actually do that? I think that people struggle somehow to understand themselves as an avatar, a character that could be, actually in some way a thought influencer or, like a more public person. I think a lot of architects struggle with hiding behind their projects. And maybe it's because simply they don't know how to unpack themselves as an attractive character online. Do you have any tips for that?
Well, first of all, I should say I'm not a social media expert. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm, but let me talk about, can I talk about bios? Because I think that's a good place where you can do that. And on the subject of social media, I think, that's something that I'm still trying to work out how to be me on social media. I'm still kind of, it's an ongoing thing of trying to work out how how I can be comfortable on social media. So I've never tried to kind of be an expert on that for my clients. Although I have to say, I think social media is really important. It's just kind of, I think I'm not a natural at it. But a bio, so a bio in a way is the most personal bit of your website, and it's the bit that is most about you as opposed to your client. But I think it can still be client-centered, and I think the thing to do there is to, if we use your word, or the word that came from me that then you've used about unpacking, is think about what you bring to a project. And, so you start your bio very much thinking about the client, what you bring to their project, because that's what they're actually interested in. And I often use this example of, if I show you a group photo with lots of people in it, and you're in that group photo, who do you look for first? So Sarah,
yes. Yeah.
Yourself, absolutely. And this is absolutely human nature. That's just the way we see things, the way we read things. So when someone comes to your bio, yes, it's going to be about you, but what your reader is looking for, they're looking for how you can help them. So think about them, think about what you bring to their project. And once you've shown interest in them, then they will be interested in you. So the point where you've got their attention because you've said, this is what you can bring to their project, these skills, this is what you'll like to work with, that you're passionate about this, although I'd say the word passionate is a bit overused, so find a different way of using it. And then once you've done that, then you can start talking about your experience, because at that point you've got their attention because you've talked about what you bring to their project. So it's about, again, starting with them and what they'll get out of working with you. So you don't have to be wild and wacky, but just be honest and transparent, and think about those things that are the things that make you a good person to work with. And then once you've talked about, so you've got what you bring to their project, then you back that up with a bit of your experience. And then last of all, if you want to give your qualifications, do that. But please don't start with your qualifications. I find it amazing how many people start their bio with their qualifications. So-and-so studied at the Bartlett and did their part 2 here and then studied at Cambridge, whatever. And I'm thinking, but at the moment, this, as a potential client, this means nothing to me. It only when I've made my decision, I like the sound of her, then I want to know that, oh yeah, you're qualified, good.
Yeah.
But I don't need to know that first. So there are lots of different ways of approaching a bio. The simplest is just to turn the bio on its head, so the qualifications go at the end. But you can get much more interesting than that. What a lot of people with how I felt it works with my clients is that often if they write about a project, a specific project, and talk about how they worked on that project and how they helped on that project and the effect of what they brought to that project, they will actually, it'll become much more interesting because it becomes more specific. And one of the things that makes how we write, that tends to become bad writing, if you can talk about bad writing, and I'll put that in inverted commas, is when something is vague, generic, there's nothing specific. So, the generic is really, if you're thinking when you're writing for your website, whether it's your bio or something else, you're thinking, I need to appeal to everybody. If you try and appeal to everybody, really you're making eye contact with no one. And no one is going to come to your website and think, this is the person for me, this is the person I want to work with. They're just going to think, they're just going to read it, but it's not going to resonate with them. So it's much, have the courage to think about your potential client, or your ideal potential client. And again, it comes back to writing for them. And, much better to make a good emotional connection with one person who's the right client than with 100 people or sort of make a half connection with 100 people. Make that connection with the right client. yeah, I think that's crucial, and I think that's a wonderful thing about architecture, is that you're not trying to shift the units, you're not trying to sell hundreds of whatever. So, you know, SEO and those things, they're important to a certain degree, but it's not all about that. It's really about attracting the right clients. So, you know, come back to that thing that you want to make an emotional connection with those perfect potential clients.
So true. I wanted to ask you specifically for this sort of one sentence description. I think that it's a very powerful tool to develop. And I think that every professional, every architect should have a way to introduce themselves in one sentence that's very powerful.
Yeah.
You know, given the fact that you're into writing, I remember once I was at a conference and we actually had to write this one sentence statement, and there was a guy who stood up and he said, he was actually a writer, and he said that his one sentence sort of statement was, I write words that sell. And I will never forget that. It was so powerful somehow.
Yeah.
Like a simple statement. I don't think I even gotten to my statement to be as powerful as this one. I'm still working on it. I think I change my statement like every month, to be honest. So do you have tips as to where to get to that, like how to get to that point to perfect your statement?
Yeah. So, I mean, the main formula is about you help someone, or, you know, your clients do this by doing that. Now, what's lovely about I write words that sell? What was it?
Exactly.
Yeah. So what's lovely about that is that words that sell, that brings in the client straight away.
Yeah.
So, you know, he's got it all, he or she has got it all in there. I think for architects, it's about drilling down to what's on your client's mind. I mean, really get into their shoes, get into their head, and think what it is that they are worried about. And once you know what they're worried about, you're going to tune in to their thoughts. And so I help my clients, and be specific about who your clients are. So I help homeowners, transform, dysfunctional, energy sapping buildings into, and you've got the fact that they're living in a dysfunctional building that's costing them a lot of money, or so just get in that sentence. You want to sort of get all those worries in, and in fact, thinking about that sentence, it could be a lot better. I've put that, said that off the top of my head. And as you say, we have to keep thinking about these, because something that's concise is much harder to write often than something that's long. And I've recently been talking with colleagues about how writing about oneself can be really hard, and coming up with that sort of the one line that describes you, that tells your little story, is one of the hardest things. And I don't think I've got it right for myself. I find it much easier to help clients with that than I do for myself. But one of the things that, I should say about writing, and why I feel it's important that people do, pick up the tools and do the writing themselves, is that, writing really helps us think. If you think back to being at school many years ago, I remember how I could read endless books about things or sit in lessons, but it was only when I had to write an essay that I really started thinking and getting to grips with something. And I think that is very true, that actually, we can do a lot of thinking about our practice if we're architects and not really getting under the skin of it. And it's that process that is what I help my clients through, of getting their story straight, of getting under the skin of their practice, and them then finding the words for it, and me helping them find the words, and coming up with that final one little line, plus the whole voice of their website and everything else they write, and for when they talk, that's the work is in that, which is, if we come back to the me saying, oh, I'm not really a copywriter, is that I feel copywriting is in the days when I was doing more of it, I felt like, well, mostly I'm talking to people about how important it is to write, and then I'm just going away and doing the writing as if it's a separate thing. But no, it's integral to you as an architect, thinking about what you do and write, and being able to talk to your clients about what you do. And I want to empower, I'm not so keen on the word empower, but yeah, I want to empower my clients to be able to have that clarity and that confidence and that consistency, that they know the voice, they know their story, which then means that they really can go out and spread the word about what they do, and they've found their voice, and they can really, whatever they're talking about, they can talk about it. And also will mean that they're attracting the right clients, because if they've kind of, if they're very clear about their purpose and they're clear about their story and their voice, that's, the clients they want should react well to that. And it's all about making, again, that emotional connection.
Absolutely. I think it's so important. And it really is just a shame when businesses or business owners or architects struggle for projects or to grow their businesses. And, something that is underlying it is just being sort of afraid or not knowing how to actually express your story and what you do with your business. I see it endless amounts of times when I browse profiles of architects on LinkedIn, that everyone just says that they're an architect and where they worked. And when you're in this industry for this many years, of course, what it means to work for this office or that office. But our clients don't. They're not usually into that. Like they don't know these famous architects and this like secondary famous or even less famous architects, which we know.
Yeah.
So
nothing. Yeah. Now this is something that I feel is, I'm not an architect, and that's really the point of me, is that I come to architecture as an outside person. I am the outside world, and I think there are so many things that architects take for granted, and that I will challenge them on, and that they'll realise that actually there is a story in that. There is something that they should be talking about, and that they can make something of. Well, they'll think, oh, but everybody knows that, but no, they don't. And it's the same with kind of storytelling. To me, a lot of the structure you need, and the way that you engage your readers, it's kind of become common sense to me. But actually, I've realised that architects, we need to tell them, we need to get them telling those stories, because at the moment they're not doing, this, I'm generalizing, but I think a lot of architects could do a much better job of spreading the word about what architecture brings to the built environment, to the world, and I think and that sort of brings me back to why I do what I do, is that I feel like, God, there's architects, we need architects in the world, and I want architects to have a bigger role in the built environment. I hate this idea that even the fact we talk about an architect designed house, shouldn't all houses be architect designed? We need architects to do a better job of communicating about the value that they can bring.
Absolutely, so important. Well, Juliette, if any architects who are watching us today, or people who will watch us in the future through this video, want to reach out to you and find your services, where do they go?
So I am on LinkedIn. That's the social media that I'm trying hardest with at the moment. So it's Juliette Mitchell. And you can find me also on my website, which is archetypal.co.uk. And Archetypal is architypal.co.uk. And I'd love to hear from more architects. Always happy to help.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today and sharing so much wisdom. It was really inspiring, and I myself will take a lot out of this for my communication strategy online. So thank you so much
for inviting me on.
It was a pleasure, really. Thank you guys also for tuning in. I see that it was quite a few of you watching. There's lots of comments just saying thank you, amazing, and just commenting over the topics. So thank you so much, guys, for tuning in on YouTube, on Facebook, and in the groups as well. It's always lovely. If you haven't yet, follow guys on YouTube as well. And you can just click the little bell icon to get notifications every time we go live. We have these Talk Tank series right now happening every Tuesday and Thursday at 5 p.m. Central European time, 4 p.m. UK time. So we'll see you in the next one. Thank you so much. And thanks again, Juliette.
Thank you, Sarah. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, take care.